ready for you to take us back.
Good morning. My name is Ed Hamrick. I'm Assistant Attorney General, and I represent the State Board of Land Commissioners. This morning, the Land Board was in executive session to discuss the Cadgene, the State of Colorado case, San Miguel County District Court case 2021 CV 30013. The discussion was noticed on the board's agenda and was limited to attorney-client communication about the Cadgene case. No decisions were made in executive session, and the board is back on the record and ready to proceed with its regular agenda. So thank you very much.
Thank you. With that, we will proceed forward with our meeting. I'd first like to open up any public comment needed for any agenda, any issue that's not on our agenda today.
So folks listening along online, if you'd like to address the board on an item that's not on the agenda, use the raise hand button on your viewer and we'll see you here and we'll bring you forward. And then if we'll look to anybody else in the room as well. I'm not seeing any hands raised, Commissioner. Is there anybody in the room? Nope, looks like we do not have public comment.
Thank you for that. We will move on. Director Ryan.
My only announcement is that Elliot Hoyt is joining us today. There he is. Elliot is our new Assistant Director of Sustainability and Working Lands. He is replacing half of Greg's current job. And he officially starts on Monday, but was able to make time in his schedule to join us today since we have all of you and the entire staff together. So welcome, Elliot. We're delighted to have him. I sent you information on his background, so we'll keep our meeting moving, but please take a chance to take a few minutes to say hi to him during the luncheon today. So, Elliot, thank you. We're delighted to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. All right, DNR report.
Aaron Ray.
Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you.
Morning, Commissioners. My name is Aaron Ray, Assistant Director for Energy Innovation in the Executive Director's Office at DNR. It's good to be back with you. My colleague Tim Brass is not available today, so I'll be presenting the DNR update. First, DNR staffing. DNR is currently in the process of accepting applications for our federal affairs analyst position. You'll remember Vanessa, who departed a while ago. We're filling that position, which we're excited about. We're also evaluating candidates for the Assistant Director for Research position with the Colorado Produced Water Consortium. So we continue to stand up that body with staff. Turning to budget matters, DNR presented its budget request along with division directors to the Joint Budget Committee hearing on December 8th. That request included significant new staff capacity for the State Land Board for the biodiversity program to prioritize habitat mitigation, carbon sequestration, and regenerative agriculture efforts. We won't know the ultimate fate of that request, but the hearing went well and would last me to appreciate State Land Board's work on that. Turning to federal planning, we are currently developing comments on a number of federal planning processes, including BLM's Solar Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement, which I'll talk more about in a moment, and BLM's Big Game Resource Management Plan Amendment. We're also working with the U.S. Forest Service through the objector process on the Mad Rabbit Trails Environmental Assessment and the GMUG Forest Plan. And as I mentioned, we're accepting applications for our federal affairs position. Turning to forestry. In June, experts from Colorado State University confirmed the presence of the emerald ash borer in two towns in Colorado, Carbondale and Littleton. That's the first confirmed presence of emerald ash borer in Western Colorado. The State Forest Service is working with municipal and private interests on the West Slope to share emerald ash borer resources from the Forest Service, CSU Extension, and other partners. Separately, the Forest Service received a $4.9 million grant from the Inflation Reduction Act's Urban and Community Forestry Fund to create a competitive grant program to support urban forests in disproportionately impacted communities in Colorado, which we're excited about. The Forest Service will run the grant program internally after the National Forest Foundation's co-proposal was not funded by the federal government. The Forest Service and the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute have developed a Colorado Forest Management Activities Tracker, which will be a repository for all forest projects in the state, regardless of land ownership, giving people the opportunity to see where those projects are happening and get more information about those projects. Data from that tracker will be available on the Forest Service Forest Atlas, and they're currently collecting data to be included in that tracker. So we think that will be a good resource for the public to find out about activities happening in forests in Colorado. Turning to fire, the Colorado Strategic Wildfire Action Program, or COSWAP, closed its 2023 workforce development application period this fall. They received 32 applications for Conservation Corps projects, SWIFT crews, and trainings. Awards will be made by the end of the year. 2 entities have been selected for COSWAP's ARPA Landscape Resilience Investment Program. Those entities were selected in collaboration with the Wildfire Ready Watersheds Program to amplify that work to ensure projects that improve watershed health and infrastructure. Turning to energy, DNR is working with stakeholders, with other state agencies, and with the governor's office on policy options to reform the renewable siting process in Colorado. And we expect legislative action this session on that. DNR has also been stakeholding a legislative proposal from our Energy and Carbon Management Commission to clarify ECMC's authority over geologic carbon sequestration projects. That has important implications for your work. And so we appreciate support from staff at the State Land Board, as well as other DNR divisions as we think through that request. As I noted previously, DNR and other state agencies have been reviewing BLM's utility scale solar programmatic environmental impact statement. The administrative draft was available to us. We submitted comments on Monday, and we expect from BLM that the public draft of that plan will be available in early 2024 for public comment. Finally, the state has been hosting a series of stakeholder meetings on the update to the state's greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap. We've been meeting in person with the public in Trinidad, Pueblo, Durango, Grand Junction, Craig, Greeley, and Montbello tonight. And we've been having virtual meetings with interested organizations. We expect that updated roadmap to be released in early 2024. And we expect that updated roadmap will include direction to the State Land Board to continue to expand renewable leasing on state lands. And we look forward to working with you all and with Land Board staff to achieve that goal. Turning to water, the Colorado River Drought Task Force, which was created by Senate Bill 23-295, voted on final recommendations to the General Assembly on December 7th. Those concepts that received a favorable vote included investing in improvements in aging water infrastructure, turf replacement, emerging water measurement technologies, and local capacity building grants for water projects, integrating watershed health into community wildfire plans, and expanding the in-stream flow temporary loan program and agricultural water rights protections. And DNR Assistant Director for Water, Kelly Romero-Heaney, is available if you have questions about the Drought Task Force or those recommendations. And finally, turning to wildlife, Parks and Wildlife staff are in the process of collecting wolves from Oregon, and we expect to have wolves on the ground in Colorado in the next few weeks. CPW is required to have wolves on the ground by the end of the calendar year. The final 10J rule on wolves was released by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service last week, just in time for wolf reintroduction here in Colorado. We also have several significant statewide planning processes underway at CPW, including the statewide outdoor strategy plan, habitat corridor and connectivity plan, state comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, and the state wildlife action plan, a lot of plans there, which will help prioritize management and conservation needs for at-risk wildlife species. I mentioned our legislative agenda. CPW is currently stakeholding several DNR priority bills, including a bill to give CPW the authority to reintroduce wolverines, so separate from wolves, here in the state. We're working through the recently threatened listing for wolverines by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That listing includes an interim 4D rule allowing for limited take of the animal for specific purposes. And that rule by the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service is now open for public comment for people that are interested. CPW is also working on legislation to provide statutory authority over invertebrates and rare plants that would help ensure CPW has the latitude to manage species at the bottom of the food web. And finally, CPW recently hosted Governor Polis for a hike at Fisher's Peak State Park on their newest trail, which brings visitors right to the top of the summit. And DNR is really proud of CPW's work to build out our newest state park. That concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Just had a question on the water recommendations. Where could I get a copy of that, or is it online, or?
I believe it's available, but I will get a copy for the.
Thank you.
And question, is the BLM proposal, is it for siting solar on BLM land?
Yeah, so the BLM is working on a west-wide programmatic environmental impact statement that would cover the siting of utility scale solar projects on federal lands. What we expect to see in the public draft, which will be available early next year, will be a series of alternatives to identify certain kinds of BLM lands as preferential for solar siting. So there'll be a range of alternatives in that public draft. The public will be able to comment on what the public thinks the best alternative is. BLM's intent is to expand renewable development on public lands.
When they say utility scale, even the transmission.
So this particular proposal will not cover transmission projects. There are separate planning processes for transmission projects. But I will note that one of the things that has been discussed is, should BLM prioritize the siting of renewable generation next to transmission, given that that's one of the constraints for renewable developers. So I expect that that's one of the things that BLM will be considering.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate you being with us.
Thanks, Eric.
All right, we are moving on to business items. Bill, do you have anything to talk about with us on the staff report?
Just to answer your questions, I'll try and keep smooth. Earning more money on ecosystem services, that was the highlight, and there's 3 other banks that are now approved that can start selling credits, so.
Which is terrific.
Yep.
Kind of a model. All right, and we will move along to final action items. And first is Rodeo Dunes Development.
That's for the people from LA, the rest of us call it rodeo.
Oh, shoot, why did I say that? Even in the later Rodeo. Matt likes rodeo better. I think it's better. Okay, with that. Hi, everybody has a moment every now and then.
Does the leach rate grow up if we call it rodeo?
Yeah.
Okay, good morning, commissioners. I trust you can hear me okay. I'm Matt LaFontaine, Acquisition Disposition Manager, and very pleased to be presenting this final action item today on Rodeo Dunes Golf Course. You can see Michael Kaiser is also a panelist right now, as well as Bill Dvorak. They are both with Rodeo Dunes and can answer detailed questions that are maybe more suited to be asked of them as opposed to me throughout this presentation. But really, we are here today with an opportunity to advance the board's strategic goal 1F, which is to be entrepreneurial in the pursuit of non-extractive and new lines of business. And I think you'll see as we go through this presentation, this is really a unique opportunity for the State Land Board, and I hope that some of our excitement comes across because of that. So the state trust land that I'm talking about today is located in Weld County, and it sits, which is in the North Central District. The property shares many characteristics with the board's lands east of I-25 and has historically been leased for grazing, but it's also favorably located just about an hour outside of Denver and a short skip from I-76. And if you know the area, it's essentially between Keensburg and Wiggins off of I-76. It's a rural stretch that's kind of far out on the path of development, but but does benefit from its location and proximity to both Denver and I-76. So the great thing about the board's dispersed land holdings, which you can see up here on the map, is that every once in a while an opportunity arises purely based on location. And I think that's really what happened here, and has the potential to really be of benefit to the board. And so here's a picture of the subject property that I took early this spring during a site visit. And as you can see, the property looks very similar to a lot of our other working lands in the areas. But in the background, you can see some rolling terrain. And interestingly enough, these are dunes, and they kind of characterize patches in this area. Under normal circumstances, we probably wouldn't think twice about these, but it's exactly these terrain features and that proximity to Denver that I mentioned that's really attracted our proposed lessee to the site. And it's really kind of a matter of perspective when looking at this land. You know, this is maybe more what Rodeo Dunes sees it looking like in the future. This is a rendering off of their website. But, you know, instead of the working lands in their current configuration shaped into masterful golf courses. And I admit when I first heard about this and started looking into it, it was difficult for me to envision, but the reality is I'm not a world-renowned golf developer, and there's certainly other perspectives on the parcel. So Dream Golf, which is the parent of Rodeo Dunes, has 3 other destination golf courses: Bandon Dunes on the Oregon coast, Sand Valley in Wisconsin, Cabot Cape in Nova Scotia. And if you check out their website, you'll see they have a good track record and have done just an incredible job of integrating natural terrain into stunning courses in several other circumstances. As we zoom into the site itself, let me kind of orient you to this map. And can you see my cursor or no?
No. Oh, there it is.
There we go. Okay.
Now it's good on the map.
Perfect. Thank you, Bill. First, Roggen, located down here, just south of I-76. The general boundary of the Rodeo Dunes Golf Development Area is depicted here in black perimeter. You'll see the blue shaded area are adjacent but not included state trust lands. And then you'll see this orange and green, which is included state trust lands, and I'll dive into that in a little bit. You'll also see 2 rights of way depicted: a primary access here in orange and a secondary access right of way here in yellow. That is in 2 segments across state trust land. So I mentioned that the location is ideally situated for Rodeo Dunes development, and in particular based on its proximity to Denver and DIA. We're sitting about an hour outside of Denver along I-76. Their initial plan would be construct 2 courses and expand up to 6 over time, potentially. And I mentioned these orange and green lands, so I'll dive into those a little bit further. But in order to facilitate their development and to provide some flexibility, we have constructed a lease arrangement wherein there'd be an initial leased premises. That's the area in orange. And then there would be subsequent option lands that could be incorporated into the lease premises over time as that expansion occurred. So that's what you see depicted here in green. The initial lease premises is 280 acres. The option premises is another 400 acres. Oops. And I mentioned the right of ways. I'll come back to these in more depth in a little bit, but there's 2 unique aspects of these rights of way. One is the lease term for this lease is 50 years, whereas our rights of way are typically 30 years. So I'll be asking for an approval to increase the term beyond our standard. And as you all know, we seek to place rights of way along property boundaries. In this case, based on siting, it makes more sense to have a main access that goes through that section 36 to the south. So I'll also be asking for approval of the waiver of the 50% surcharge typically associated with with rights of way that don't go along property boundaries. So some lease highlights before I get into the terms of the lease themselves. We really think that we have the right partner in this lessee, based on their track record, based on their vision for the land. And also that we've come to an arrangement that has the right structure to both provide the flexibility to Rodeo Dunes to facilitate their development, but also to provide a long-term reasonable and consistent income to the board. With the option lands that may be incorporated into the premises, there's the potential upside to the board. Right now, that's obviously a smaller rent that's paid on those option lands, and it's for a limited term, only 10 years initially. But in the event that the leased premises grows from 280 acres up to 680 acres, there's certainly an upside potential there for the board. We are cognizant that certain long-term leases that the board has entered into maybe don't look as good in hindsight. So we have taken some steps to mitigate kind of that long-term lease risk. And in particular, we're tying rents over time to a consumer price index, which will ensure that inflation effects don't either go for or against the lessee or the board over time. And I think that's kind of critical because of the experience we've had in certain other instances. And lastly, development generally has a value add component where the end result is worth more than the costs of development, and this may especially prove true in this instance. If Rodeo Dunes is successful, the highest and best use of this land is going to uplift from grazing to destination golf course. All right, so now on to the terms themselves. Some aspects of this get somewhat maybe complicated, or they're a little atypical compared to other board leases. So feel free to ask any questions along the way. The initial term will be for 50 years. There will be one 49-year extension option at fair market value. So the 50-year term is straightforward enough. The extension term, we have a series of steps that the fair market value rent would be determined, starting with the board and lessee seeking to agree upon a rate. And then if that doesn't happen, then going through a series of appraisal steps. I mentioned the initial 280 acres for the leased premises. Again, that was the lands depicted in orange on the previous map. Starting rate will be $525 an acre, and there will be 2.5% fixed steps or annual escalations. And then I touched on this a bit, but the rents will then be reset every 5 years based on the CPI index. So looking back at the prior 5 years and what realized inflation was, rents will either come up or down to be back in line with that midterm inflation trend. And last, this lease will be subject to any existing leases out there, which is a part of the coordination that Rodeo Dunes has been doing in their planning thus far. With the option premises, the option will run for 10 years on that 400 acres. It will be an all or nothing exercise. So the lessee will have the right but not obligation to incorporate the option premises into the primary lease premises at any time during that 10 years. But it's for the entire full 400 acres. So they would be unable to say incorporate 50 acres or something along those lines. And then in exchange for that right, they're going to pay an option rent starting at $26.25 an acre on that 400 acres, and then increasing by $26.25 every 2 years thereafter. So starting in year 3, $52.50, starting in year 5, $78.75, and so on. We took a hard look at what were some kind of unique risk profile aspects for this lease. And we sought to mitigate those to the maximum extent possible. Without question, we think that Rodeo Dune's success is in the best interest of the trust and its beneficiaries. And in order to kind of help facilitate that upfront development, staff has negotiated an initial 50% base rent abatement through the earlier of calendar year 2025 or Rodeo Dune's opening their first course. And so really this is essentially some rent relief up front as they build up their business. There are two distinct termination rights that the lessee will hold under this lease. The first is prior to any construction occurring, and in the event that government approvals are not able to be obtained, they will have a no fee, no refund termination right, which we think is fair given that the state trust land wouldn't have been affected. They have another midterm termination right, which would allow them to terminate the lease with an appropriate notice anytime during the term, so during that 50-year period or the subsequent extension, in exchange for a fee that would be equal to the present value of then remaining rents during the term, discounted at 6%. There is a substantial bonding component associated with this based on the surface disturbance that will occur, ranging between $2,500 and $10,000 an acre. $10,000 an acre being, hardscape, paved roads, et cetera, which will be a reclamation bond and ensure that the board maintains a level of protection there. That bonding is really in line with what we do in the other lines of business, including solid minerals. And last, again, recognizing kind of some of the upfront risks, Michael and Chris Kaiser have agreed to a limited personal guarantee on the performance of the rent payments itself, up until such point that Rodeo Dunes has posted 3 consecutive years of positive net income before depreciation. Okay. Any questions on those lease terms before I move on to kind of the right of way concepts?
I had one, this is Dr. Chavez, on any of our land, will there be wells? I take it they're going to use groundwater to irrigate these courses.
Yeah, and that may be a good question for Michael Kaiser. The state trust land water is not in use as a part of this lease.
Sure.
Right. I guess I have a policy question for my colleagues in that, several meetings ago, we talked about not doing longer leases. We even said that for ranch land, 25 years was too much. And so now I'm struggling with why we should have a 50-year lease when I think our standard is 30, right, on properties like this.
And if I could add some color to that, early discussions with Rodeo Dunes, it became clear that in order to support the necessary investment required for this sort of development, a longer term was critical to them. So that's essentially how we ended up at a longer term at a staff negotiation level.
I would also just add to that, philosophically, this, while it's different from the affordable housing project, there are some similarities in terms of you're building a structure that's designed to be there for a long time and is likely to get financed. I don't know that if these gentlemen are using financing, but in general, if you're financing a leasehold, you want the lease to be longer than the term of the financing. So I think of it more in terms of some of the housing projects we've done where you're making a really significant capital investment on the land and want the term to be long enough for the amortization of that investment.
And to follow up on that, in real estate portfolio, we discussed this is much more like a real estate ground lease,
Right.
as Bill was saying, which is a form of financing and imperative for any kind of development to go on. But it's uniquely located, so in a way, it's a ground lease for business operation in a grazing landscape. And the grazing leases are the ones where, you know, that's an operating sort of a lease. And that's where I feel like we focus most of our conversation. And this one also has an inflation adjustment, which I don't believe we've.
Correct.
I understand that, but I just think in policy sense, there's the argument to be made, even for ranchers, that long-term investments, you know, are important. And I think this is a precedent as we think about longer leases. And I want to raise that before we make a decision.
I kind of similarly on the policies that. Just in reading this, understanding, and thank you, Matt, for all, you know, there's a lot of work that's gone into this. I think I'm struggling a little bit with. It is so long and we're saying we're wanting to be entrepreneurial, acknowledging that this is new, kind of a new type of consideration for us. Have we already? I know I've missed a bit. Has this been discussed previously?
We toured up there.
Okay, so I missed
Yeah,
that.
I think that's probably.
That's where I'm, because I was
Yeah.
just like, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I forget where we're going, but we passed by this.
Mhm.
area.
Okay.
Sterling.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yes, I did miss that one because that's also where I was just like feeling like this is new. This is, you know,
Yeah.
Mhm.
but passing it, I mean, like, versus here's all these specific deal terms that have been worked out, understanding that this is. I understand the business proposition on the golf course side, but some questions that immediately come to mind for me are kind of how does that entrepreneurialism balance with our kind of sustainability goals as well, water usage, just kind of that piece of a golf course use, the golf course market generally. We understand that, yes, that's helpful that there's a personal guarantee here. Matt, I saw on your slide, it said limited personal guarantee. Can you,
Yeah,
what
so
is the
that
limit?
limited to the actual financial performance of the lease. As opposed to the any of the other maybe terms that fall under it. So
Okay.
assurance of payment of rents essentially.
Right, okay, thank you. And then, like, do we have an understanding of how the rents proposed here, how does that fit in what otherwise would be a market for this?
Couple of Greg Oakers, assistant director for a little while longer. A couple of thoughts for context, and I'll come to your question in a minute. I don't know if Matt was entirely clear. So the black boundary includes a significant amount. As you can see, the uncolored land is private land. It belongs to our current grazing lessee.
Mhm.
They are participating in this project. And
Okay,
I suspect, although it's not come to this, should we choose not to participate, the development likely could occur around us without our land.
okay,
We believe participating is the better opportunity for the landlord. Regarding water, I will let them, the proponent, the developer speak to it. But I believe part of what they'll say is this is not a traditional golf course with big irrigated fairways.
okay,
This is dune style golf in which you pretty much preserve. So from a stewardship standpoint, it has far lesser impact on the landscape than a traditional golf development you might be thinking of would be. You saw in the image, it's manicured greens and tees, and much of the remaining landscape is left in its natural state. It's the appeal of the dune style Scottish golf courses.
that's helpful. Thank
And
you.
then lastly, this conversation has been going on for a long time, probably longer than they would have liked, because when they first approached us, maybe over a year ago now, for sure, I think this gets to your question about rent, we hired an outside consultant with expertise in valuing and developing pricing around golf course transactions. They've done more than 800 of these. And I would say where Matt ended up in a negotiation compares favorably to what they suggested we should strive to achieve from a lease standpoint for a golf course. So keep in mind for grazing land, we lease this today at about $5 an acre. And I did not get to it yet. If he did, he's going to. We're leasing at a multiple of 100 of that. So hopefully all of that is some context to some of the questions you were asking.
Yes, that's all incredibly helpful, because I think it's the trade-offs, right? What are we making there and understanding that context? So my final question then is just, obviously we want everything to go perfectly well. Have to consider if it doesn't, if golf does not prove viable here, or just, on an ongoing basis, if ultimately this is not, because it will be changing the landscape, right? They'll be actually making some physical changes. It is helpful that it is that dune style, those types of, but that's just wanted to understand kind of the thought process around, should golf go away and there's not another operator that's coming in to do that, what does kind of reclamation of this land and then having another use of that potentially look like?
I think there's two. Matt, I'm going to let you jump in. I will just say, I think there's two alternatives. The bonds can be used to reclaim the landscape to something resembling its current state. It could go back to grazing. We also had conversations along the way as an alternative use up here from the land board's point of view. And there are some challenges with it. It would have a much greater impact on the landscape than this proposal does, but this is along the new power pathway. And there was some discussion about whether or not this land would be suitable for large-scale solar development at some point. We felt like this was a much more sensitive use of the landscape, and we're very intrigued by this, but that there are potentially alternative uses someday down the road, although a long way down the road. This corridor is developing, urbanizing, it's probably the wrong term, suburbanizing fairly quickly. There's some large employment projects being developed. We're not far from some of the development to the southwest. So I suppose someday in the long run, this may be development land.
Thank you. I apologize if my colleagues already understood those pieces, but I think it's always important. Obviously, us as a board, we first and foremost want to start with these with understanding what is in it for us, what are we giving up otherwise, especially when it is long-term that way. We see what it can do for the golf operator folks, but that's helpful.
And Matt, I didn't mean to steal your show. Please jump in on any of that.
No, I think that's all correct, and we sought to price the bonds in such a manner that it would ensure that reclamation ability. And really that's kind of a backstop. There's a lease obligation for reclamation in addition, and I think importantly, and I have not explained this yet, but many of our leases have kind of a planning and then a production component, whether it's the same lease or it becomes a second lease through an application process. And this is a single lease, but it provides for an ability to do a lot of this detailed planning and analysis by the developer up front, including feasibility, and having that initial termination right, where in the event that construction doesn't occur, they can terminate the right is also a component, I think, that is important. Certainly we want to ensure that this is successful if it happens. And I think that the developers, on the same page in that regard. Okay, so then jumping back on this, sorry, go ahead.
Just for clarification, isn't our standard lease 30 years?
No, there are
Wrong.
different.
I know it's
there are different. I believe there are different lease standards for different lines of business, but we don't have any sort of policy that limits ground leasing to 30 years. In fact, as was mentioned is the case with affordable housing, which is in some ways a similar construct. Those are often longer in the 40, 50 plus range.
What you may be thinking of is that in some of the lines of business, staff authority only allows staff to approve a lease of 30 years. The board always has the ability to go as long as they want, but there are some lease types where the staff authority is limited to a 30-year term. Rights of way around those.
Yeah, we limited ourselves. We didn't limit the organization. We limited staff. So that stuff out longer than that comes to you.
And do we have any others besides solar leases that are this one?
Well, as Matt alluded, we have some that in hindsight, we didn't do as good a job as we might have on negotiating, but you know, hindsight's perfect and foresight isn't. We have some water leases that are longer that come to mind immediately. We do have some ground leases for affordable housing. You'll be asked to do one on Dow Junction if that advances. We have one with the National Guard for training over the Lowry Ranch. I'm trying to do this off the top of my head, a handful.
With one under office buildings in Fort Collins.
Public purpose uses than golf course. And don't get me wrong, I'm from Oregon. I've lots of abandoned dunes golfers. But, and so it's not so much about that project, it's about precedent. And in my mind, when we exceed or go for a longer lease, I think there needs to be a public purpose involved with it, because this is seems like well, it's entrepreneurial, it's also a departure from the kind of leasing we've done.
Yeah, no, I have a slightly different perspective, and I really respect where you're coming from. In that, I think on this particular property, we wouldn't have this opportunity. You know, in all likelihood, it would be ag, or potentially we could sell it for development, but I don't see a public purpose that would drive a necessity, right? And I feel like I really do think this is entrepreneurial. It's one of these very rare occasions where we can think about how to generate more revenue than we would ever have another option
But
to
couldn't we
do.
make that argument on almost all the land we have?
I don't know that I don't know that, but I viewed this as a commercial proposition. I really did more think of it more along the lines of how we were looking with some of the affordable housing projects. And it's a different commitment, absolutely, but I think the rationale behind why it's deserves a different consideration in terms of length of lease is to me acceptable. But I wanted to just acknowledge your perspective, and I understand. I just have a slightly different lens.
And I agree with Chair, Joseph, would you prefer we just sell it? Straight up sell it right now? Do not have a long-term lease?
Well, those precedents are being set by states around us.
Back to the commercial real estate analogy. There will be fairways and greens on our parcels, but this will be a resort, and there will be hotels and lodging and restaurants similar to Bandon Dunes. None of that will occur on our property. That will occur on
Around it.
fee land and around us. But if that helps frame your perspective about the scale and duration of investment that's being made to support the golf. And so again, I think that may help folks think about this in terms of a commercial real estate project. Yeah, Commissioner.
Mr. Krogh, I was gonna hold my kind of questions and comments to that end, but since we're talking about it, I would love to hear from the proponents. What is this envisioned scale of development, and can you summarize numbers of jobs and, you know, spin-off economic prosperity that will be stimulated by this project?
Sure. May I address that question?
Please.
And then,
Introduce yourself, please.
so I'm Michael Kaiser. I'm a golf course developer. I'm the owner of Rodeo Dunes. I now own the land within the black boundary that is not currently owned by the state. My family and I own Bandon Dunes Golf Resort in Oregon, which has been mentioned during this conversation. More recently, we've been developing Sand Valley Golf Resort in central Wisconsin, Cabot Links in Nova Scotia, Canada. Just a little bit about our company, just to put this conversation in the context of what we do. In this country, after the Second World War, golf took a turn away from the way it had existed for almost 600 years. And it became a vehicle primarily to sell real estate. And it promoted lush, manicured garden states. And, since for the last 70 years, that's been the norm in the golf business. What we are trying to do, and this started when Bandon Dunes opened in 1999, is introduce the American golfer to golf the way it had been for the previous 600 years, which is a very minimalist experience laid on top of natural sand landforms. So we've been doing that since 1999. We look all over the world, all over the planet for sites like this. And what is appealing about this site is that there's very little for us to do besides leave what is so great, which exists today. So we don't start with demographic studies or economic studies. It all comes down to the quality of the contours. And this site is phenomenal. It has wonderful natural features, and we intend to do very little to it. So starting with the golf course, I was out last week with the architect. Really, the only construction that you're going to see on these first two courses that we build will be flattening out the tees. When you play golf, you start, the beginning of each hole is a tee, and it's a flattened area, let's say 20 feet by 40 feet. That's the extent of our construction, and we will go to great pains to do as little as possible to the natural topography there. So our plan is to start with two golf courses. We're going to open those courses without the hospitality that we hope will come later, the restaurants and accommodations. Each of those golf courses will have approximately 80 acres of fescue. Another thing that's unique about our company and speaks to our water use is how we use water and how we maintain turf. We use native grasses that are drought resistant. And that's because the game, which we enjoy as it's played in Ireland and Scotland, is playing on firm, dry ground. All these courses were seeded long before irrigation, so the grasses go dormant when it doesn't rain in the summer. So we use grasses that can go dormant, they go brown. You can visit this course in July and see brown fairways, and that's the way it's supposed to be for us, not just because it uses far less water, but because it makes for a more interesting game where the ball is bounding and bumping along these really interesting contours on the ground. When you use less water, you use far fewer pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers, because it's the water that flushes those out and through. And when you're not, applying nearly as much water, you don't need to use nearly as much inputs. So, as an example, for a fertilizer, you might use 1/10 of a pound over 1,000 square feet, in growing the golf course. And it's a fraction of what is normal in the industry. We promote the walking game. We do offer for people who need to ride in a golf court, we have ADA golf courts available to all of our guests, but we promote the walking game. It's a wonderful exercise. And it's something that's really, really important to us. But finally getting to that first question of our ultimate vision, if we're successful with our first two golf courses, we're going to keep building one at a time. But we would have, with this deal, land for as many as 6 golf courses. And we would hope to also build restaurants and hotel accommodations for people to come from. We think they would come from all over the world to see this site. We think it's that special. And we typically build about 100 beds per golf course. So it's, it is conceivable that if we are successful, we have as many as 600 beds and, 6 or 7 restaurants. But we go very slowly and take it, one step at a time. So I'm describing a hospitality business, and the hospitality business relies on labor. We employ a lot of people at every step in our business, setting the course up and maintaining it. Every morning, people who greet our guests, serve them breakfast, lunch, and dinner, prepare their rooms. So direct employment at Bandon Dunes is almost at 1,000 full-time employees now. At Sand Valley, we're a seasonal business, but peak in the summer last year, we were at 475 employees. There are huge costs, investments to build the rooms and the restaurants. We pay a lot of real estate tax in both states on those. Our payroll is significant. Dollars that feed directly into the local county and town economy. And if you want some additional information on that, I believe John and our team is available, and just ask, we could shed some more light on that. But it's we intend to employ a lot of people, pay a lot of payroll tax, pay a lot of real estate tax. I do just, can I keep addressing some of the points that have been brought up, or should I pause and allow for follow-up?
Yeah, share with us what you think is important.
Okay, thank you. Somebody asked about the water. In this picture, there are 5 pivots, which we have under contract. None of them sit above state land. So that's where we intend to draw our water from. As I mentioned, compared to most golf courses, we intend to use less than might be typical. I touch base on, high employment, which is true across the hospitality industry. Our intention is to do very little to the ground, right? We talked about building tees. We always, all of our projects have been, and we fell into this, and then now it's become part of our mission and purpose, but they're all restoration projects, right? So we have found that the land wants to be what it was, prior to European settlement, and we do everything we can to not just encourage that, but restore it. So on a property like this, there have been 170 years of grazing, and there are some wonderful native species out there, and not too many invasive, which is great. But we want to continue to promote the propagation of native species on this land, which also help stabilize these moving dunes. At Sand Valley, our footprint of restored land, so taking agricultural timber plantation, red pines planted in rows, restored to prairie and savanna, we're at about 15,000 acres. So we have 4 golf courses, we need 400 acres. We've gone well beyond our footprint, required for any aesthetic value to our guests. Our guests love looking at, the native nectar plants. And they love learning about the restoration, but we've gone miles and miles past anything our guests can see. It's the mission of our family is to create these machines that promote, restoration to the surrounding lands. And I would hope that we would go well beyond the black lines on this boundary and those restoration efforts. That's unusual, and I want to highlight it, not to be braggadocious, but because it's important to us, and it will be an important part of this project. Golf course, even if you use low water inputs, the grasses are a monoculture, right? So you lose biodiversity on those 80 acres. You gain enormous carbon sequestration. I heard before we started, an incredible thing about managed turf grass is its ability to get carbon down into the roots. University of Madison here in Wisconsin has been studying it, leader in that. But there's great carbon sequestration of prairies, but managed turf grass is significantly more because it's put so much faster down into the soil. So just a little tidbit on the managed turf. I now own the land within that black line that's not green or orange. And the green and orange land is really important to improving our probabilities of success. For the first 2 golf courses, there's great land on that our architects have routed through. But were this deal to fail, we still own more than 2,000 acres, and we would reroute the golf courses. So it would be our intention to continue forward. We would greatly prefer to do this in partnership with the state under this lease. It will allow for a greater golf course and increase our probability for successful development. In terms, I know it's a long lease, and during our negotiation, I just want to highlight somebody mentioned this, and I'm sorry, I don't know your names and I can't see exactly who's speaking, but we are in year 1 paying over 100 times the current market rate for lease of this land, which was hard for me to swallow as the potential lessee. But in talking to Matt, the intent was to cover for the length of that term, but that's a huge multiple, 100 times today's fair market value, starting in 2025. I think that's worth highlighting and repeating. We talked about what could happen in the event of failure, and I just want to stress again, the bonding requirements would we are required to restore the land to the state it is in today, right before the lease. So if we failed 10 years from now, the monies that the bond would pay for the restoration of the land back to its current form. Those are my initial notes, and I'm sorry I went a bit off beyond the question, but just wanted to address some of those points as well.
Thank you. I think that's helpful. Any other questions at this point from commissioners? Okay.
I do have one more. quick
Yeah.
one. Just a point of clarification for the improvements. The cart paths or walking is a good thing, but if you do have to have golf carts, what sort of cart path system do you envision?
We are not envisioning any. We are planning to drive the carts over the turf. So at Bandon and Sand Valley, we do have golf carts out on the golf course every day for people who are unable to walk. And given that that's fewer carts than you might see if everybody was driving, we can scatter them on the fairways, and we don't need to have cart paths. They could just drive right over the fairways. Also, that condition of the turf that I was describing is so hardy and resilient. It's not that lush, delicate grass that you might picture or see on the weekend when professionals are playing golf, on TV, where it's really built. It's a resilient and robust, and it could take points or areas where we felt it might be worth putting some base course in that. It wouldn't be like a concrete, it would be gravel mixed into the sand, similar to what the paths that we will have out there are the maintenance paths. Our maintenance equipment needs to get out to the holes every morning. And at Sand Valley, they typically in the first month we're open, we don't have anything amended into the soils, and then we just add gravel where we find we need it. So they start just driving through paths in the sand, and then we find, and I'm making this number up, but less than 5% of the areas we need to drop a little gravel to stabilize the sand, and those are the paths. But they're not the concrete paths that you might see on a typical golf course.
Thank you.
Very helpful. All right, Matt, we'll go back to you.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to just dive in a little bit on the rights of way. And as a reminder, we're talking this primary access here in orange and these two segments in yellow as secondary access. So per our right-of-way policy, staff has the authority to approve rights of way up to 30-year terms. In this instance, it is necessary and logical to have a 50-year term that coincides with the overall development lease. So embedded in this board approval is that authority to extend it. We have calculated the fee to be paid to the board based on the board standard policy pricing, and then grossed it up to that 50-year term. So the total paid for those two rights of way to the board would be $150,182. As part of the lease negotiation, staff agreed to request from the board that be paid in installments over the first 10 years of the lease, so coinciding with the first 10 annual payments. I touched on this earlier, but the waiver of the location surcharge, given the unique aspects of this development in the right of way, typically there's a 50% surcharge in the event that rights of way don't follow property lines. So requesting herein that that's waived. And then acknowledging that there will likely be future applications for rights of way for utilities, potentially telecom, and so on. We would request that the board expand the limited delegation of staff authority that is existent under the right-of-way policy solely as pertains to this Rodeo Dunes development, such that staff could approve subsequent rights of way at a 50-year term versus a 30-year term, and that they could follow the access rights of way that were just depicted without that surcharge. Okay, and then I just wanted to touch on what we really see as a few kind of secondary and tertiary benefits. One is you saw on the map of the state trust land that there's a lot of adjacent lands that aren't directly a part of this proposed lease, but are in close proximity. And there's the potential to see a value uplift just based on the density and significance of this development on all of those adjacent lands. So, some not, heretofore quantified uplift, but very significant potential there. Next, some of that same land might become available for land leasing opportunities with Rodeo Dunes in the event that they expand their footprint or find that their land use needs change over time. So some additional opportunities there. Michael touched on some of the regional economic impact, but in the event that Rodeo Dunes is successful, this could certainly be a boon to the area. And then I would touch, I know that the board has a lot of opportunities that pop up every once in a while. But here, I think we really do have a once in a lifetime opportunity to participate in this unique opportunity. And at the end of the day, if Rodeo Dunes is successful, this will be a very, very positive thing for the trusts. On that 280 acres, for example, kind of a base case, across that 50 years, you're looking at potentially up to about $14 million in rent payments. So a lot of positives here, and I will put up our recommendation, which is that the board approve a new 50-year lease and associated rights of way with Rodeo Dunes with the terms presented in this presentation and in our cover sheet. And I'm happy to, again, take any questions that may be out there or put our board order up, which is a little bit lengthy.
Any further questions for Matt? Yes, Commissioner Brogan.
Mr. Brogue, Matt, I'm curious sort of, what you envision as being perhaps the biggest challenges of co-location of all these other different uses, adjacent, current lessees, management implications, and sort of how you're addressing those. So what are the biggest challenges that you see from a management operating perspective, and are there any thoughts you have about how the state land staff might?
Yeah, so I think what could have potentially been one of the more challenging aspects of arranging this would have been our leases, our existing leases. The fact that our agricultural lessee was the former owner of all of the private land within the boundary and has been working with Rodeo Dunes and advancing the development has really kind of greased that aspect. All of our future leases will kind of be cut off, or in other words, there will be limited opportunities to further lease any of this land based on Rodeo Dunes, use, which is pretty straightforward. One implication of that is future oil and gas leasing will be done will require that the oil and gas lessee have a no surface occupancy stipulation within their lease. Given that I think a lot of the oil and gas is being developed from offsite, that doesn't seem to be problematic. Since we started this negotiation, we've already entered another oil and gas lease that has that NSO. So that's how it was put out there. But I think ultimately in the event that, that they can get through the permitting process, which is really, getting control of the state trust land is really, as I understand it, the last or one of the last, key components for Rodeo Dunes to get in place before they can proceed with that. But after they can get through that and move forward, I suspect that post-construction and post-opening, this will become a fairly low management, low maintenance lease for us that will really benefit the recreation line of business.
Thank you.
Commissioner Probe, I just also want to point out that what we're talking about here initially is less than half a section. And if they take the option, we're talking about a whole section. So from an oil and gas perspective, that's easy with horizontal drilling. There are a few rights of way that I think these guys have routed around, and the grazing lessee is really part of the transaction. So I don't think that'll be a problem.
I was just curious about the existing gas leases and should they have any rights to pop something up?
Yep.
All right. With no further comment from commissioners, Nick, we'll open this up for public comment.
Folks listening along, if you'd like to address the commissioners on this item, use the raise hand feature. No hands raised, Commissioner.
Okay. Thank you. With that, we do have a draft board order. If someone would like to make a motion.
Commissioner Chavez, I move we approve the Rodeo Dunes Golf Development Plan that's described in the board package.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Commissioner Clark. We'll call a vote. Commissioner Chavez,
Yes.
Commissioner Probe,
Yes.
Commissioner Heath.
I want to say before I vote that I have reservations about the policy and the length of the lease. I will support this, but I want to note for the record that I think this has been in conversation at the staff level for a long time, and it would have been better had we, as a board, had the opportunity to know about this much earlier. Even though I know you all were discussing it, we really did not have information. So I want to note that I will vote for this support.
Okay, so noted as well. Commissioner Clark.
Similarly, I started this feeling like I don't feel ready to vote today. I would have liked to have some other information, but my particular questions were answered. I think we got that context, and so appreciate that, but agree with Commissioner Heath that this would be the type of thing when it is new and long in my way. For us, but an earlier conversation, I will vote yes.
Okay, and I'll echo my colleagues' comments around just including this was an ongoing conversation, and I think I have, since I talk with Director Ryan more frequently, I probably had a little more knowledge and didn't realize it wasn't quite being as shared with the commissioner. So I think it's a good
Thank you.
point to note.
That's on me.
I was gonna own it.
Oh, you're leaving.
I was seriously, it's an entirely fair point. We can do better, and then I'm sure Elliot will do better.
Okay, but I will vote yes. That motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And we are adjusting our agenda slightly. What's our proposed, just because
Well-
we do have an awards recognition very soon, and we don't want to hold up
Right.
our guests with that.
So, Madam Chair, I'd propose that, Nick, with your okay, we'll move the auditing to next month. That's not time sensitive for signing a contract or anything, right? We could do that in January. Great. The other two items are just a couple minutes each. So let's take care of Renegade now.
Okay,
And that should allow us to get over to our lunch and our award winners.
all right, thank you. Katie, we'll turn to you. And I will note, we did receive public comment on this, which we may well hear more about, but certainly that was included to us and will be part of our record. Okay,
All right, good morning, commissioners. Katie Stitt, Oil and Gas Leasing Manager, and today I'm bringing in front of you lease extension request for leases 108-343, 108-364, 108-287, and 108-597. Today's request is an opportunity to update 4 leases that were issued over 30 years ago with modern terms and bond rates. So our discussion today is going to be centered around 5 leases currently held or in the process of assignment to Renegade Oil and Gas Company. These leases are all located in Adams County, which I've highlighted in yellow, and this is in the top middle portion of the map on the screen. I did want to just start with a little bit of background on this item. So the largest hurdle in getting these leases, as they're currently held by production, into production today was the shutdown of the Third Creek gathering system. So what is a gathering system? So a gathering system is a network of pipelines that are laid in an area and designed to collect the product. And they transport that product to a central point. And that central point could be a compressor station, it could be a processing plant, it could be a storage facility, could be a larger network of pipes, or it could be a shipping terminal. In this particular area in Colorado, if you produce oil, you typically get associated gas. And so in order to produce that oil and sell it, you have to have a plan to address the gas takeaway. Gas takeaway ideally is handled through a gathering system, so you can take it and sell it at market money. But there are other methods of addressing gas, which could include venting, flaring. You can hook up a generator to create electricity, and then you can use that electricity on location. And in Colorado, our regulatory rules do not allow venting or flaring at this point. Additionally, in some instances, you can't use the gas either. For example, if your well produces too much gas that you can't use it in a generator because you'll just have too much of it, you wouldn't be able to use it on location. Other instances could be that your equipment doesn't need to use as much electricity as you generate, or the equipment doesn't run full year. So we have leases, say in northwestern Colorado, they have to run a heater. It only needs to run in the winter time. So you would only be able to run half the year. Additionally, in that is that you will find that some equipment is only allowed to be on a well pad if it follows the local rule. So, for example, just like zoning laws only allow certain uses in certain areas of, say, a city, some equipment is not deemed appropriate for a well pad. So what you want to use the electricity for is not allowed under the local rules. You may not be able to use the electricity you generate for that either. One other component to this is that gathering systems are typically either a low pressure system or a high pressure system. And to put gas in a pipeline, you have to equalize the pressures. Wells that produce small volumes of gas frequently need to be compressed to pressurize it up to move it into the pipeline. And if you do that on a well site basis, that gets very expensive. So generally you will find low pressure systems and high pressure gathering systems overlap in an area. So kind of with that background, this is a map of the Third Creek gathering system. This is zoomed into this area in Adams County. And the red stars, in kind of the upper middle portion of the map represent the approximate location of each of the 5 leases we're discussing today. All of the green lines on this map, with the exception of the ones to the northwest of I-76, so in the upper left, ignore those green lines. The rest of these green lines is what's considered the Third Creek gathering system. This system was attached to many wells, and it took all of the gas from those wells and brought them to compression stations, which are these blue dots, which in our boardroom look black, but probably online they look blue. And at the compression station, the gas was pressurized up and it was put into the bold red lines, which in our boardroom also looks black. And then those higher pressure pipelines took the gas to market to be sold. While many of the wells that were on this gathering system were older, most of them were still very economic and produced volumes of oil and gas that could be sold and utilized. The owner of the gathering system cited age and safety concerns when they shut the system down. And at this point, the system is closed. There's actually been segments of the pipe that have been physically removed from the ground, so it's not an intact system. As a result of that, many of the wells that were on the system were either plugged and abandoned by their owners, or unfortunately, there's a large number of them that the operators walked away and they were abandoned to the state, and they've now been enrolled in the Energy and Carbon Management Commission's orphaned well program. So that's handled by what was the Oil and Gas Commission. Renegade may be one of the last operators in this area that's attempting to return their wells to production and stay operating in this area. I must have extra hidden clicks in here. Some consideration points in an extension request. Staff carefully considers whether or not extension requests are appropriate. The first criteria that we tend to look at is whether the lease is already been standing. And this is a series of things that we look at. So first, we review our own records, make sure that a lessee is in good standing with rent, payment, that they're in compliance with stipulations in their leases. But our leases also require that a lessee stay in compliance with state and local laws. So we also look at documents filed at the Energy and Carbon Management Commission. We look at other publicly available information, such as reports filed with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And at that point, if everything looks good, we kind of move forward with considering an extension request. We also complete a review of publicly accessible data to determine a fair market rate recommendation for a bonus. In this particular instance, I did an 18-mile radius around each of the subject leases to see what other oil and gas leases were going for. And after that evaluation, we come to a decision, and extensions are only offered if they make sense for trust beneficiaries. I will say that staff has communicated extensively with Renegade since the Third Creek system was shut down in 2017, or had been noticed that it was shutting down in 2017. Renegade has made what I would consider real efforts to attempt to find a solution to this problem for themselves. But they've run into some hurdles both at local level and at state level in either getting their ideas in progress, or we've had several of them shut down. So just the sheer number of wells that Renegade has on the Third Creek system gives them an incentive to find a way to return as many of them as possible to production, rather than shut it down. We're in front of you with this request because this extension actually falls outside of staff authority to approve under our oil and gas leasing policy, mainly for the term that they're asking for the extension on. We negotiated several aspects of this lease extension with Renegade. And our cover sheet covered the bulk of them and included the actual extension document itself, but I just wanted to highlight a few of them. And that Renegade has agreed to pay a $10 per acre bonus, which we consider above the market rate. This would generate $7,200 for the trust. We use bonding to protect state trust assets should it become necessary. Oil and gases can include surface reclamation, but it also includes monetary compensation, for example, royalties if they're not paid, because we can't recoup oil once it's been produced. So royalties doesn't include a coverage in the bond. Renegade currently is bonded at what was considered the blanket bond amount under the old policy, which is $25,000. Here, Renegade has agreed over the next 5 years to up their bond to the board's current value of $100,000. So staff feels it's very significant benefit to us.
Is that per well or total?
This is per their activity with us. And I want to clarify, we hold a bond with our office. Renegade is also bonded with the counties they operate in. They're bonded at the Energy and Carbon Management Commissions. There's multiple layers of bonding that the gas operator has. This is mainly to protect specific assets to us, specifically royalties. But we also use it if, for example, we need to do additional work on a surface location that we own the surface on. These extensions provide a clear timeline to return the lease to production, which is 3 years. They don't get the leases established back into production by then. The leases will expire and they come back to us. One of the leases does have a title issue in regards to the lessee of record or the owner of the lease is reflected in our records. The owner that we have on our files right now is a company that no longer exists. But the wells that are on that lease are all operated and owned by Renegade. So if we can get the assignments recognized for Renegade as the owner of the lease, that clears up a lot of issues with our records, and it also provides some better clarity on operator responsibility on the lease. And then finally, the updated provisions include the modern royalty payment provision in our lease. It addresses some clarification around pauses in production for things like reworking or maintenance issues. And it also addresses if they have to shut in due to any kind of regulatory concern, they need to address rule changes, things along that line. And some other benefits that we found is that part of this recommendation is that Renegade has agreed that they will relinquish and plug and abandon 2 wells that are located on lease 108256. What this does is we own the surface, so this jumpstarts reclamation on our property. It allows us to use this property again for whatever we may need to use it for. It will reduce litigation risk both for us and for Renegade. These terms in the extension were specifically negotiated for these leases, so it's not a binding precedent across other leases. And that is beneficial because we are looking at the site-specific issues that may exist. And this, we do feel, is the best opportunity for development of the mineral estate, because Renegade already has the infrastructure in place for their wells, and they're familiar with operating in this area and the challenges. They've been working with landowners and regulatory partners in this area for years. If we put these back out to lease, it's, the new operator will be starting at day 1. So this gives us the best opportunity to get these into production again sooner. So staff is recommending, since we have these beneficial updates in place on these leases, that the board approve the 3-year extension under the terms and conditions outlined for these 4 leases, and direct Renegade to start the plugging and abandonment process and reclamation for the 2 wells on the 5th lease 108256. I just wanted to put our mission and our fiduciary duty slide up. You have seen this slide many times, so I won't go into detail, but for folks that are viewing it. These are the things that we consider when we make recommendations to the board. It's something we consider for everything we do. So this is integral in our recommendation today. You mentioned that we received public comment on this item, and I just wanted to briefly address it. And first, that I appreciate folks looking at our agenda and providing comments and participating in the process. I did want to clarify, when we started this process with Renegade, we looked at many of the things that were mentioned in that letter. And these specific sites aren't applicable to what was discussed in the letter. These sites are in good standing. They have no indication of leaks. But you know, it's been like 3 months since I looked at it. So yesterday I did call our regulatory partners to see if anything had changed. These sites remain in good standing. I also wanted to mention that the letter specifically cited a CSU study that was recently completed. And I certainly am not questioning any of the study results, but that study was conducted on orphaned wells. These are not orphaned wells. These have a responsible operator who's out there taking care of these sites. So I hesitate to extrapolate the study to these locations. We do have 2 representatives from Renegade Oil and Gas here today with us. So if you have any questions for them or for me, I'd be happy to take them.
Thanks, Katie.
Commissioner Probe, to your point about the letter we received and not being that familiar with the oil and gas business. My understanding that you're saying that the concerns raised about health and air pollution are concerns that more broadly affect all wells that might be in various temporary shut-in or abandoned condition. And that we're managing, and our lessee in this case are managing these wells as a best in class manner.
These locations are in compliance with all regulatory requirements for health and safety, any kind of venting. So I can't say that I certainly agree that there are operators out there that are not, and there are issues with those locations, but I can say for the sites that we're recommending the extension on today, that is not the case. These are in compliance.
Thank you.
There are questions or comments from commissioners? I don't see any. Let's go ahead and open this for public comment.
Member of the public, if you would like to address the board on this item, use the raise hand feature. No hands are raised, Commissioner.
All right. With that, we do have a board order in front of us if there's a motion.
I move to approve the oil and gas lease extension requests. 108-343, 108-364, 108-287, 108-597 as presented in our board packet.
Thank you. Is there a second? Commissioner Heath? We'll call a quick vote. Commissioner Chavez,
Yes.
Commissioner Probe, Commissioner Heath,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Chair votes yes, that passes 5-0. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, commissioners. And are we gonna quickly do the statewide board leasing agenda?
You're gonna do that, or is Andy here?
I thought you would. Yeah.
That'd be great. And just for our recording here, we are deferring item C to next month. We'll do that in January. So don't forget about the audit request, the I&D funds for a royalty auditor. And here we are with Andy for the board leasing agenda.
Hello, Commissioners. Andy Bissett, Transactions and Record Services Manager. We have the December 2023 board leasing agenda. for your review and approval. This month there are 6 competitive bids, 5 of which are agriculture and 1 recreation. Happy to answer any questions. Staff recommends approval of the December 2023 board meeting agenda.
Any questions? That was very short and to the point.
I move, we.
We have to do public comment real quick. I don't see any questions from us. Nick, let's see if there's any comment from the public.
For our sole member of the public, if this was the item you were waiting for, please raise your hand. No raised hands.
All right, let's go ahead and ask for a motion to support the board order.
I move that we approve the board leasing agenda as represented in our packet. Second.
Motion Commissioner Frobe, second was Commissioner Heath. I'll vote Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Frobe.
Yes.
Commissioner Heath.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
And chair votes yes. Pass that 5-0. Thanks so much, Andy. All right, with that, we have minutes. Were there any changes to the minutes? All right, we will pass those by acclamation, and I believe our meeting is adjourned for today.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Commissioners. Commissioner. I believe you requested that because you had a conflict Thursday. And at this moment, we have about 2 hours of material, so I was thinking we would do it virtually.
Fine.
So you can all stay where you are, or where you're going to be on that day, and we'll just do it by Zoom.
The
Okay,
10th.
the 10th.
It's just got 20 minutes longer because we
Yeah.
bumped Nick, but again, it's it's your morning. Yeah.
15 minutes, you're right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're now going to Grant Humphreys Mansion. Do you all know where that is?
Yeah.
And
Eighth and Penn-ish, right?
correct.
Yeah.